A small security guard with a huge German shepherd on leash barred my way into the supermarket. I just need a bag of cornmeal, I told him. You can't go in. For the dogs, I said. I put my hand out to pat his animal. Hey, he dragged the dog away. He may bite you. Not me, I said. He'll bite if you order him to, or if he smells fear. But I am not afraid of dogs. I patted the dog's head, and its tail twitched, a mere suggestion of a wag. The guard looked at me incredulously. I smiled down at him. Please, let me pass. He glanced behind him into the supermarket, then back at me. A riot going on in there, you know. I'm not afraid. He scratched his head. I don't even think them have any cornmeal. Allow me to go and find out for myself, officer. The manager knows me and usually keeps back a few scarce items in the store for me. I'm Mrs. Gregory. Mrs. Gregory, he echoed. Clearly didn't know me. Probably didn't read the newspapers. I told him who I was, or rather who my husband was. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. Well, try your luck, Mrs. Gregory, but I don't think you can get past them women inside just now. Maybe when the police come. The police have been sent for? The little man nodded. It's only police can control them women when them start going like animal. What's the problem, I asked. He shrugged. Them think the manager hoarding scarce good in the storeroom, flour and rice and soap, so they trying to break down the door. I'm sure the manager bought whatever goods he has with hard-earned cash, I said. They're his, and he's entitled to do what he wants with them. I'll bet if their neighbors tried to break down their walls to get their goods, they'd be extremely annoyed. I went inside and walked over to the manager, a pleasant, well-dressed Chinese gentleman of about 40, a second-generation Jamaican. From the little elevated cubicle that served as his office, he was watching, with typical Chinese inscrutability, the dozen or so women who were yelling at the top of their voices while they beat against the storeroom's drawn steel shutter. Good morning, Mr. Lowe, I said. I'm sorry about this little trouble you're having. Lou, he said. Good morning, Mrs. Gregory. You know, Mr. Lou, I continued, the one thing that's wrong with this country is that it's overpopulated. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the howling pack of women. They weren't harming the shutter, but I suspected he was worried about them turning to the goods on the shelves. Really, Mrs. Gregory? He said. Sure. You have a big supermarket here. If you didn't have so many hungry belly creatures to cater to, I indicated the mob, and their hungry belly offspring, the goods you store here would be quite adequate. He glanced at me again, inscrutably. I wondered if he hadn't understood my point. In other words, I explained, your goods are only scarce because so many people want them. He smiled. You may be right. And how can I help you today? I need about 10 pounds of cornmeal, I said, for the dog. He looked grave. We have only a little cornmeal left, you know, and they want it. He glanced at the women and hesitated. Couldn't you buy some of the tinned dog food for today? Oh, I have lots of the tin stuff, but I need the meal to mix with it. At $3 a tin, it's too expensive to feed my 4 dogs with tin meal alone. I see. Well, could you wait a while? As soon as the police get these women out of the store, I'll be able to get to the cornmeal. They won't be long, will they? I hope not, he said, eyeing the women. I frowned. You can never tell with the police, though, can you? They might be in the middle of a domino game or something. Tell me, is anyone in the storeroom? A couple of packers? Why? I wonder if I could persuade them to pass me the cornmeal. He shook his head. You'd never get past those Viregers. I think you should wait. Smiling at him, I said, my husband's favorite adage is, nothing tried, nothing done. I walked across 4 aisles to the mob. It was then that I noticed that there were 3 young men. 2 were boys under 12, really, in the group. While the women were deadly serious about what they were doing, screaming through the shutter or hammering with their fists or feet upon it, the boys were having fun, grinning at each other and shouting for shouting's sake. The din was terrific. Open the damn door. Bam, bam, bam. Pass out the rice. Poof, poof, poof. Me picnic half a feed. Wham, slam, bang. Give me my soap powder or I will broke up your... Biff, buff, buff. The damn Chinaman thief me when the goods plentiful and he won't sell with them when they scarce. And on taking him side against on the own people. Puff, slam, bam. Me say open the door. The women were of all shapes and sizes, short, tall, fat, slim. Some were colourfully, some drably dressed. Most were very black, though there were a couple who were brown-skinned, like me. One was even fairer than I was, but otherwise quite ugly. Ladies, I said, quietly but firmly. May I have just a word with one of the storemen in there? No one paid me the slightest attention. I tried again, a little more loudly. Ladies, if you would excuse... It was like talking to a wall, except this was a moving, heaving, punching, kicking, screaming wall of human bodies. But they were all deaf. I'm addressing you women, I shouted. Again in vain, except that 2 of the boys looked at me, grinned, and went back to assisting the women in making noise and uselessly battering at the shutter. I can't stand being ignored, never could, and I felt myself losing my temper. But that would have been unseemly. So I decided against shouting any more and against trying to push through the women to get to the shutter. Breathing deeply, willing myself to be calm, I retreated a few paces from the pack, which was lucky for me, for that was when the police arrived. 5 of them, gas masks around their neck, revolvers in their holsters, batons drawn and waving, rushed through the door, shouting. I heard them, but I doubt if the women did until the cops were right on them. 2 of the policemen grabbed 1 boy each and hauled them from the crowd. Depositing the youths a little distance away, the cops then rushed back to assist their colleagues in their efforts to quell the women. Broke it up! Stop this noise! Or now go home! Out of the man's store! And similar instructions were shouted to the women, while the cops pulled with hands and pushed with batons at the human wall. But the women, angry and desperate, were not easily moved. At first, they resisted the policemen passively. Then they started pushing back, so that for several minutes there was more confusion around the shutter, not less. Then, gradually, the superior strength and fighting technique of the officers caused a breaking up of the solid mass into smaller, discrete groups of fighters. Mostly there was 1 policeman to 2 or 3 women, except in one instance where a young cop was tackling a large, dark woman in a floral dress and blue tie head. Cool down yourself and come out of the man's shop, yelled the policeman, pushing the woman in the general direction of the door. Come out yourself! Me I forget rice and flour for me family dinner, the woman shouted back, and she pushed the lighter constable back towards the shutter. You're resisting an officer of the law. I can arrest you. What? Move out of my way. Me pick me half a eat. I warning you. The policeman raised his baton high in the air. Don't liquor! The yell came from behind me. I turned. It was the oldest of the young men, a youth of about 17. He rushed forward, but the baton landed with a loud crack on the woman's skull. Blood gushed from a large cut that suddenly appeared on her forehead. She staggered and bent low, both hands holding her head. Aunt Ivy! Aunt Ivy! The youth was screaming, his agonized voice blending with the woman's wail. He rushed to her and held her around the shoulders, preventing her, it seemed to me, from falling. Glaring at the young policeman, who looked a little scared at what he had done, the youth snarled, "You son of a bastard! You piece of nastiness! You lick Aunt Ivy! I'll go fix you!" He kicked at the policeman, caught him in the crotch, and the cop doubled up in pain. The boy drew back his foot again. "You bitch!" And he was aiming another kick at the constable's face when another policeman walked away from the woman he'd been struggling with, drew his gun, and, quite coolly, pressed it against the youth's chest and pulled the trigger. A loud report, then dead silence. The youth fell like a full sack of cornmeal, pieces of flesh scattered. Blood gushed suddenly, then just as suddenly stopped. I glimpsed the stunned faces of the policemen and crowd alike as I turned away. It was quite distressing, nauseating in fact. But I looked on the bright side. At least there was one less hungry belly to feed. The manager, still in his cubicle when I reached him, looked sick, not inscrutable any more. "Do you think I could get my 10 pounds of cornmeal now?" I asked. He stared at me as if he hadn't heard. "My cornmeal," I repeated. "The mob's dispersed. Would you have one of the storemen bring it to my car?" "Yes," said the manager slowly, apparently in a daze. "Yes, Mrs. Gregory. Please pay the cashier." I did so and walked to the door. The little guard and his large dog were both staring through the glass. I patted the dog on the head again and turned to the guard. "See, I'm not afraid of dogs," I said.